Having looked at the key thinkers in each ideology, now we're just going to briefly look at how you could possibly use them or reference them in different kinds of essays that may come up. So the exam board has said that the essays can be set on the key themes, the 4 key themes that are in all the ideologies, and our tensions within the ideologies, which can relate to the key themes as well. So our key themes were human nature, the state, society, and the economy. And in each ideology, different tensions will come up, and often the essays are simply ways of repackaging these different kinds of tensions. The same terms will come up again and again. So within liberalism, then you have tensions over individualism, human nature, freedom, the state, the economy, society, and democracy. And the 2 main strands are modern and classical, although we'll mention neoliberalism as well, although in the syllabus it's not actually in liberalism, it's in conservatism. And these are the kinds of terms: developmental versus egoistical, positive versus negative, etc. And depending on which topic you're talking about, you will be drawing the other tensions in to elaborate on the one you're talking about. Okay, so our key thinkers in liberalism then: Locke, Wollstonecraft, Mill, Friedan, and Rawls, and then the other ones we mentioned at the bottom, again, which don't count for the assessment criteria. Okay, so the first core theme, human nature. Well, all of them buy into the bits across the top. They believe that individuals are of equal moral worth, and you could pull in Wollstonecraft or Friedan in terms of male and female, all rational. Again, the same: Locke, Wollstonecraft, Friedan. They're individualistic. We are self-interested to varying degrees. Individuals are progressive, and they're wary of the corrupting nature of power on individuals, which kind of pulls in constitutionalism as well. So any of the key thinkers could be used when you're making the case that what they all have in common. However, the main tensions, I suppose, things like Mill would believe we have a greater possibility for development and self-actualization. Modern liberals would argue that it's about what we could be rather than what we are. So for classical, you could possibly put in a Locke in there. You can link that to the minimal state versus enabling state. Certainly Rawls could fit in the modern as well, about individuals having a scope for self-development. There's not a lot of meat in this human nature essay for liberalism, but you can make the case about who we are rather than who we can be, and the possibilities for development. And certainly Friedan and Wollstonecraft can fit in here quite well as well, how women were denied the ability, but their human natures are essentially the same as men. Moving on to the second one, which was society. Well, all liberals believe individuals within society possess natural rights. The structure of society should be arranged to maximise individual freedom and equality of opportunity from which a natural order would emerge, and society should be characterised by tolerance of different viewpoints. Slightly more straightforward here, obviously classical and neoliberal, and you could pull in Nozick and Friedan here as well, believe society is essentially atomistic, where self-interested, autonomous, independent individuals pursue their self-interest, whereas modern liberals, and you could pull in the other thinker, Green, but presumably you could pull in Rawls as well, argue that society, individuals are independent and interdependent, and also within society some individuals are less free, less autonomous due to circumstances beyond their control, and therefore require the support of an enabling state to achieve autonomy, self-actualization, and so on. And then you can pull in some of the other bits, such as managed economy, welfare state, and so forth. So that would be society. Next one would be the state, which is probably the most straightforward one of all. All believe the state is a rational construct based on a social contract, based on consent, and within the state they prefer a representative democracy. However, clear differences here in that Locke would argue for a minimal or night watchman state, and you can use the Thomas Paine quote, it's a necessary evil, or Jefferson, that which governs least governs best. You could also put in, Nozick, his idea of a minarchist, that the state is so minimal, is basically law and order and security. And the only function that the state would have for classical would be to protect life, liberty and property, with state power constrained and severely fragmented. And that can link to negative freedom, the absence of constraints, and laissez-faire economics. Modern liberals, again, such as Rawls, would argue for an enabling welfare state linked to positive liberty, managed economy and so forth. Friedan, and to probably less extent Wollstonecraft, would also argue for an enabling state in the sense that the state should take steps to enable women to have equality of opportunity and to remove barriers and discrimination against women. Subtle point is, you could say that all liberals argue for a minimal state. They just disagree on what the extent of minimal is. For classical liberals, it literally means minimal, doing the least amount. For modern, it's a minimal state. The state should be doing the minimum it needs to do to provide everybody with equality of opportunity and the ability for positive freedom and so on. Okay, the economy, again, this one's fairly straightforward. So John Locke has to do a lot of heavy lifting in this one as a key thinker, but obviously Locke, Nozick, and you can throw in Rand as well, would argue for free market, laissez-faire, in line with the belief in negative freedom, minimal state. You could mention Adam Smith and his invisible hand. And the minimal economy is a capitalist or free trade economy, is good for the protection and accumulation of private property. Mill would also fit in here. He believed that the capitalism, free market was this guarantor of private property and individual initiative. Sorry, I didn't mention the all bit, because all liberals support capitalism and the free market to varying degrees. But again, Mill is this kind of bridge. You could argue, that in the harm principle, that yes, it implies negative freedom and laissez-faire economics, but if the economy was seen to be doing harm to individuals or groups, well then Mill, you could extrapolate and say Mill could argue for a more enabling state if the state or the economy was seen to be doing harm. The more sort of explicit opposition to it would be Rawls with his enabling state, and you could mention the economy, Beveridge and Keynes in particular, but the managed economy, and Rawls would argue for the economy to be managed as well. Wollstonecraft and Friedan would also argue that the economy and society would benefit greatly if females were allowed equal access to it, and they would benefit from the initiative and strengths and knowledge and intelligence of women as well. Nature of freedom, again, nice straightforward one. All liberals believe that individual freedom should be maximised. They all believe in negative freedom. It's just that some don't believe that negative freedom is sufficient for some people. So clearly Locke and again Nozick and Rand would believe in negative freedom, the absence of external constraints. And again, that links to a minimal state and laissez-faire economics. Mill, as we saw when we were doing the key thinkers, can fit in there as well. I mean, Mill's harm principle can be used as an argument for negative freedom. However, clearly others would argue more for positive freedom. I mean, Rawls would fit in there as well, and Green can argue that people can have their freedom constrained by things other than the absence of external constraints. In effect, you can have your freedom constrained by your what we now call socio-economic circumstances. Clearly, Friedan and Wollstonecraft would say that you have your freedom constrained because society discriminates against you, and they would argue for anachronistic term for positive freedom, for self-development and self-fulfillment. And Mill is an interesting one because, of course, he can slip in here as well, because in his argument for higher pleasures, he really is heading towards talking about self-development and self-actualization. So he's not a complete believer in negative freedom, because he can argue for positive freedom as well. And again, he was this bridge between classical and modern thinking. So, again, subtle point, a bit like the state, they all believe in negative freedom, but they just don't believe that negative freedom is sufficient for each individual. Next one would be the nature of equality. Well, all liberals believe in foundational equality. We're all born equal, all of equal moral worth. They believe in formal equality. We're all equal in the eyes of the law. We have legal and political equality. They all believe that individuals should have equality of opportunity, which of course means society is a meritocracy, and that it will be unequal because people of different talents will go further and faster than everybody. But everybody should have equality of opportunity. The difference here is that classical liberals would simply argue that all that's required for equality of opportunity is to have foundational equality, formal equality, negative freedom, laissez-faire economics, and a minimal state, and then everybody has the same starting point in the race of life. So for everybody has equality of opportunity. However, modern liberals, Rawls, and you can throw in Green as well, and you can throw in Friedan and Wollstonecraft, that not all individuals have equality of opportunity. You can have your opportunity restrained by your gender, Wollstonecraft and Friedan, or more broadly by your socio-economic circumstances. And therefore, again, you link it into, you need an enabling state, you need a managed economy to allow people to have the provision of equality of opportunity. But all liberals would argue once you have equality of opportunity, well then the race of life is fair, and you would end up with an unequal society, a meritocracy. Last one then is liberals and democracy. All would support a representative democracy, pretty much to do with their fears of democracy. And in this case, the divide we looked at when we were doing democracy. All liberals had a number of fears of democracy, ruled by the uneducated masses. There was male tyranny of the majority. Classical liberals, though, if you want to do this, were particularly afraid that democracy would lead to an infringement of property rights, and Nozick and Locke were keen on this. Nozick said that's what really happened, that unscrupulous politicians would promise the earth to voters, and of course who would have to pay for it? Would pay for those people with property through taxation. That democracy would lead to an infringement on property rights. Mill was also fearful of the tyranny of the majority. Democracy would lead to a dull conformism and lead to the sidelining of men of education and experience. But again, Mill is this nice bridge, because although he had his reservations, Mill, along with other modern liberals, said that democracy could be harnessed as a force for good, because it would encourage participation and education and would help those, in inverted commas, uneducated masses to self-develop. And representative democracy was a good thing, because experienced and educated representatives, a bit like Mill himself, could mediate the demands of these inexperienced and uneducated masses. Democracy was also protective, as it was based on consent, and also helped achieve equilibrium or consensus in an increasingly complicated society. So probably in this one you could stick to Locke and Mill as the two examples. You could probably throw in Nozick as well, and it's a bit like the democracy video you will have looked at in the class notes. What were the fears of democracy, and then what ways was democracy beneficial? It was protective because it was based on consent. It was developmental because it encouraged participation in education, and it helped achieve a consensus in an increasingly complicated society. And then the last essay, which is a broader one, and it's very much common on the old syllabus, has modern abandoned classical principles. Well, all of them, all liberals, believe in the importance of the individual, in rationalism, toleration, representative democracy, and limited government. So clearly, modern haven't abandoned those aspects of classical liberal principles. But you can obviously make a strong case that classical liberals would say that they have abandoned classical liberal principles because of laissez-faire economics versus managed state, negative freedom versus positive freedom, limited state versus enabling state. So you've got those list of things, the tensions earlier on. They said that by and large they have tended to abandon them. However, you can make a kind of subtle point that the modern liberals would deny this. They've simply said that they have the same basic aims as classical liberals. All they've done is to build or evolve classical liberals' principles in response to changes in society. For example, they would argue that the enabling state and the managed economy and positive freedom helps expand individual freedom. It doesn't negate individual freedom. It allows more individuals to have freedom, and therefore that's perfectly in line with classical liberal principles. Rawls, that nice subtle argument updating Locke's idea that rational individuals would give their consent to live in a fairer society, going back to his veil of ignorance thought experiment, and it was perfectly compatible with classical liberal principles. So they're the main kinds of essays, according to the syllabus, that could come up, either the core themes and are a mixture of the tensions within. And you must make sure, as we said, to mention reference at least 2 of those across the top when you're doing the essays.